As everybody exits for a break for votes, I want to reintroduce our reporters and analysts who are here to do a little analysis with us. Senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, co-host of MS Now's The Weekend, Jackie Alanany, former January 6th Committee Senior Investigative Counsel Temidayo Agenga-Williams, and former Democratic Senator from Missouri, MS Now political analyst Claire McCaskill. Lisa, we just heard opening statements and the first few questions, really. 3 people out of 44 people on this committee. As you just kind of soak in what the dynamics are there, how do you think Jack Smith is handling himself so far?
I think Jack Smith is unflappable, as we were told he would be. This is the first time many Americans have seen Jack Smith speak, right? He did an interview with Andrew Weissman, who is one of our analyst colleagues, a few months ago at the University of London. But most people don't know Jack Smith's voice. So this is a shock in and of itself to see someone who looms so large in the American imagination just speak for himself. And so far, he's maintained his calm. He has tried to be measured, as he just was in the exchange we watched with Jim Jordan, where he said he hadn't made any final determinations about Cassidy Hutchinson as a witness. That, to me, is a show of somebody who is being thoughtful and measured, not somebody who's rushing to judgment. And yet, Jordan Sutter spun it around on him, said, that's the whole point. Everybody knows this person was a liar, and you had not made a determination to rule her out. I want to go back to something, though, that to me, the most important thing that happened here this morning was Jim Jordan's opening statement, because lost in all of the details of his recitation of how Trump got investigated was a simple statement that he made twice, where he said the American people had elected Donald Trump twice. And that's got to be news to Donald Trump, because Donald Trump, in his long-ranging interview with the New York Times, very recently said, and I'm going to quote from the article, "I shouldn't complain. I won 3 times. I mean, I won 3 times. I did great the second time, and I didn't get credited with that." So I thought it would be interesting to know what Donald Trump is thinking right now, to the extent he's watching this. Does he agree with Jim Jordan's statement that he was elected only twice by the American people? That seems like a big disjuncture to me between the Trump world and even what we're hearing from the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee.
This is, Temidayo, I think, a very fascinating confluence of the legal and the political, right? There are a lot of lawyers on this committee, and we heard it, for example, from the Republican from California who sounded like a prosecutor, like he once was. But let me ask you about this. My understanding is, if we take it in its simplest form, these indictments against Donald Trump was he responsible for a criminal scheme to overturn the 2020 election? And did he store classified documents that should not have been there, obviously, at Mar-a-Lago? So help people to understand why so much of this conversation was about phone records and Cassidy Hutchinson, who my understanding is not even named in the indictment.
Because the disconnect is intentional. Because the evidence against Donald Trump as it relates to both those cases is incredibly strong. They were laid out in extensive indictments that are in the public record, starting first with January 6th. You can look both at what the subcommittee did, but also this long speaking indictment where it lays out the facts as to what happened. The reason they're talking about Cassidy Hutchinson is because they intentionally want the sideshow, in my view. The evidence here was truly a product of an extensive, thoughtful, cautious investigation, aggressive but still cautious. And I think
can you be both?
You can be both, because you can see prosecutors who can overcharge. You can see prosecutors who are aggressive and show no restraint. What he did, though, was follow the law. He charged a case that was strong, but you didn't see him charge, for example, the Fani Willis case, where he put in 12 or 24 individuals. You didn't see a 30-count indictment where he sought to overload. He charged 4 counts. He charged this president by himself. And what he did was lay out all his facts in a thoughtful way. And a lot of the complaints they have here are about the fact that he was prosecuted, Donald Trump. They're not charging the substance. They're not saying that the evidence wasn't there. I saw no engagement with the facts as put forward by Jack Smith, which to me actually shows you how strong the case is. If they had an ability to challenge the substance, they would. And because they have not challenged it, it's because it's strong.
That is interesting, because that's why I have said, as we're all watching, this is hard to follow because it isn't related specific to his investigation. It's more of sort of the noise around the investigation. Claire, what do you make of the tone we've heard from lawmakers so far?
Well, this is a mismatch, because you've got somebody who has very calm demeanor, very staid. I would disagree. I think he seems like a pretty humble guy to me. I mean, he's never been out there throwing sharp elbows for TV cameras in this entire time he's been involved in this. And you compare and contrast that with the highly combative theater that's going on. And what these Republican members are going to try to do is they're going to try to raise some money today. They're all going to try to have the clip that gets used on their outlets so they can then regurgitate that back to an email base and social media base that gives them money for their campaigns, that makes them seem like they're the strongest pro-Trump Republican congressman ever to exist. So their goal is to stand out in theater. His goal is to calmly give them the facts. And they're going to do everything in their power not to let him do that because the facts are devastating to Donald Trump.
But do you think his calm demeanor breaks through?
I don't think it does. I mean, honestly, I think, one of the problems he's going to have is he thinks he can do it the way Jack Smith's always done it, calmly, with evidence. I mean, if you're a good prosecutor, you let the witnesses and evidence speak. You may argue in closing argument and try to do it in a compelling way. But a good prosecutor is not the star of the show. The evidence is the star of the show. And they're not going to let him do that here. So if he doesn't amp it up a little bit, if he doesn't ask, for example, Jordan, let me finish my answer, please. He should have let him. He wanted to say, you could tell he wanted to say something that was important, and Jordan just cut him off. He's going to have to do that a little bit, or the only time we're going to really hear anything that's relevant to this is from when the Democratic members, and I'm worried the Democratic members are now going to try to do theater and not going to give him a chance to, in fact, lay out what he learned in his very thorough and fair investigation.
Yeah, I think there could be a strategic mistake there, and we've seen it in some other hearings where the members of Congress talk 10 times more than the people who are supposedly there informing us. But I'm very curious, Jackie, what you think about this, because in that vein, how much of this, besides obviously the fundraising and playing to their base, will be the Republicans and has been the Republicans channeling Donald Trump, and we know how he feels about Jack Smith?
I think that's the bulk of what we're ultimately going to see today. I spoke with someone yesterday for quite some time who was involved with the planning of this hearing, was involved with Jack Smith's initial transcribed deposition, who acknowledged that there are plenty of people in the Republican Party who think this is a terrible idea to relitigate January 6th, that Jack Smith is whip smart, he's going to wipe the floor, and that January 6th was objectively not a good day for the Republican Party. But what members on the Republican side of the committee did agree on is that there is still a very strong, very powerful faction that includes the president that hates Jack Smith and have their own conspiratorial views on what happened on January 6th, and they want to see some blood. They want to see some accountability, and that is why the decision was ultimately made against some people's reticence here to bring him forward. But the president, as this person said to me, he hates Jack Smith. He thinks he tried to ruin him and his friends' lives. And so I think a lot of the commentary you're going to see and the lines of questionings from Republicans today is going to be directly pointed towards Trump. The other aspect of this that I do want to comment on, the Cassidy Hutchinson of it all, I was also told to expect some more pointed commentary about her.
Why are they focusing on her?
She's someone in her capacity working for Mark Meadows was essentially the conduit between the White House and Congress. She developed a ton of relationships. She had a lot of friends, people who thought they were genuinely friends with her, and they felt betrayed by her decision to go to the January 6th committee and also felt like she wasn't being truthful. And I will note, and Temi, not to put you on the spot here, but at the time when we were covering this, there was a lot of debate internally on the January 6th committee about whether or not Cassidy was a viable witness, that whether the committee would be doing themselves a favor bringing forward someone who was a secondhand witness who, as Jack Smith said in his initial transcribed deposition, that her testimony may or may not be admissible, that it wouldn't be as powerful as firsthand testimony, and did say that it did call it at one point that she gave evidence that could be secondhand hearsay.
Lisa, of course, you, I know, had a chance to kind of review some of the transcripts from his 8-hour deposition. It ended up being 250 plus pages that was released on, I think it was New Year's Eve. So perhaps our viewers are less acquainted with it. How does this testimony, the questions and answering that we've seen so far compare to that deposition?
Jack Smith hasn't done a lot of talking yet.
Yeah.
You know, we're doing a lot of talking about him, but aside from his opening statement, he really hasn't been given much of an opportunity to describe his decision making. I would say that that deposition was much more focused on what the investigation was about. This seems like a much greater free-for-all. I mean, in part, that's because the deposition, while many members were there, was also conducted by professional staff. So it's not surprising to me when you contrast, for example, the January 6th hearings on one hand with, for example, the depositions that people gave, and you look at those transcripts. The transcripts are oftentimes more informative than the hearings themselves because of who's asking the questions.
Right.
And so I don't know that we're comparing apples and oranges in that way, Anna.